Okay, so now we're ready to assign some attributes to this window component that we've just created. But before we do that, I'm going to clean up. I made a little error in the last one while I'm saving. I'm going to save as a window tutorial. We're going to call this window. And then I'm also going to delete this door tutorial. I can just right click on that here and choose delete. We don't need the door tutorial. And the other thing I need to do is really this file that I'm in right now is basically my build file. So what I need to do is make this into a component. And then I'm going to call this our condoc underscore window. And I'm just going to call this for tutorial. And that way I'll know I can delete it without disrupting. So we'll say create. Okay, so now this component here, this is the one that is like the dynamic component. We are going to be assigning attributes to this. So I'm going to right click on it and choose dynamic components, component attributes. When I do that, you can see that we have our condoc window. You can see the whole name here. And then you can see all the pieces that make that up. We've got our horizontal 1 and 2, our vertical 1 and 2. And you know what? I actually missed. I think I had a layer turned off. No big deal. We can go to our 2D graphic. I need to grab those pieces. And we'll cut, so Control X, and then do a paste in place. Okay, so now we've got all of our pieces inside of this condoc window for tutorial. All right, so we're looking good. There's everything we need. All of our 2D stuff is at the end. That's kind of ideal. And then here's all of our 3D stuff. Okay, so as far as adding attributes, we're going to want to have our window width, height, and depth. That's going to be an attribute of this main component. So I'll click on the plus sign, and I can go to our size. And if I click on the top, I can do add all. So we're going to do that. So we just added our size in there, and then the other thing we want to do is add a custom attribute that's going to be user defined. So I can click on add attribute, and then I can just start typing, and I'm going to call this FT. And FT is going to stand for frame thickness. All right. Now frame thickness is going to be defined as, we're going to call this we click on this little context arrow, and we're going to say users can edit as text box. The display of that is going to be called our frame thickness. And then it's going to display in the, we're going to do the end users model units. So frame thickness, end user model units, apply. Okay, so what that means is that we just added an attribute. And if I look at right click on the component and go to component options, that's where this frame thickness is going to show up. So when I give this, deliver this dynamic component, the end user is going to have some of the stuff that they can mess with so that they can, tweak this thing, make it right. I think that the frame thickness is probably one of those things that will work out. Probably for most of the time you'd want it to be like 1.5 or 2 inches, but maybe other people want other things. Okay, so we can close that for now. That's all good. Now when I'm setting up these formulas, I need to really just look at like each piece of this. So they're really all based on either the length X, and really X and Z are the main ones. Glass is going to be based on Y. So like the glass is actually kind of easy. So let's add an attribute to the glass. The glass needs to always sit on the green. It's always going to sit at half of the window depth. All right. So I'm going to add an attribute, and it's going to be our, well, actually, let's see. Let's add an attribute called our location or our position. So position, as far as, we'll just add them all. Okay, so you can see it's 2 inches over, 2 inches up, and 4 inches back. Well, this attribute of 4 is not always going to be 4. We don't want that to be absolute. So I can double click on it and choose that this is going to equal, type equal, length y divided by 2, and then hit enter. So that is now a formula. So if I double click on here, I can see that. And you saw how I did that. Actually, let me back that out of there. Let me just backspace and hit enter. So we're back to the default. I double click on here and choose equals. And I can go up here and click on LENY and /2 and hit enter. So now that is like a dynamic formula. That formula will recalculate whenever I set the window depth with the scale tool and stretch it around. It's now going to recalculate based on that formula. Okay, let's keep going. So now we've got our glass, the position set for this, but I need the position set for the red and the blue. So the red position is really going to equal the frame thickness. Our frame thickness, let me just set a number of 2, like that. So I double clicked in here, set it to 2. That's going to be kind of the default start. And then our position X is going to be 2, and our position Y is going to equal that frame thickness as well. So you can see why it really helps to have a sketch like this in front of you to really start thinking about like what are these different numbers I'm working with and how to build this formula. So even though this isn't fully complete, and I'm realizing now that I've got a few other little things I'm adding as I go, this is a pretty common way to work. So let's keep moving. All right, so we've got our glass position set, but now I need to add another attribute, and that's going to be our glass size. So I'm going to add all of the size attributes as well. Now you can see that it's 20 and 20. The length in the Y direction being 0, that really doesn't matter. We don't need any thickness to our glass. All right, so now length X should actually equal length X of the glass is going to equal basically the same formula as the horizontal H1 and H2, which is window width minus frame thickness minus frame thickness. So I'm going to, let's see, we're going to double click in here and say this equals length X minus frame thickness minus frame thickness. Enter. And this one is going to equal the length Z minus frame thickness minus frame thickness, and hit enter. Okay, so now the glass, it has a dynamic like a recalculating equation that's going to build the location and the size of that piece of glass. All right, so that one was a little bit easier. Now these other guys are getting to be a little bit more difficult. So let's work on the 3D frame here. So when I look at this frame, something to note too is that if I hide the rest of this model, the origin point, you know, this is the build point right here in that front bottom corner. And here's our origin point here in that front bottom corner. And everything is based off of this front bottom origin as well. So I think that when you're building a dynamic component, it probably is easiest to kind of start at the origin and to not move things drastically off of the origin. Each piece should be kind of have the axes set at that front bottom corner. Just kind of makes a standard baseline of where to start. Okay, always good to save. I'll do that once. All right, so now we want to set the, we can minimize our glass, and let's go with, let's just make a copy of this and see what we've done. If I were to stretch this, everything distorts, but see, nothing's rebuilding yet. So the glass might be rebuilding a little bit, but we're not seeing that just yet. So let's keep working. We're going to go with, we need to do the size and position of all of our H1, H2, and V1 and V2. So H1 is going to be, I'm sorry, let's do V1 first. So V1, it being this first one here, we want to add its position attributes. So its X position is really always going to be 0. So I'll say equals 0, enter. And now you can see it's no longer kind of grayed out. Now it's like a hard line, 0. Its Z position is always going to equal 0. And its Y position is always going to equal 0. So really, I just want that vertical one, the position of it, always to be locked in at 0, 0, 0. That's kind of the starting point. Now, the size of this, I need to define the length of it, the height of it there, as our equal to our length z, and I need to set this kind of thickness of it equal to ft. So we need to add some attributes, being the size attributes. So this is going to equal, which I think it would anyway, but we'll just kind of verify with the formula. It's going to equal that length z, and then this is going to equal the length y, which I think it would anyway, but we're just going to do it. And then this is going to equal our frame thickness. That's really the main one. All right. Now, everything's kind of set in there for V1, so that's looking good. That one's done. All right, so now let's go to V2, and let's add our our position attributes. Now, you can see that the position, this point right here, this is kind of already suggested. I mean, this is where it exists right now. So we need to make an equation that equals this 22. And that equation of D on my little sketch there is going to be the window width minus the frame thickness. So this actually equals the window width, or the X, minus the frame thickness, like that. Cool. And then the Y, this point right here never wants to sit back on the Y, and it never wants to sit up on the blue. So I'll just say equals 0, enter, and equals 0, enter. All right. So our vertical position our position of V2 is good. We need to add an attribute being the size of V2. Now, you can see that length X, that should equal the frame thickness, and the length Y should equal the length Y, and this one should equal length Z. Very good. So that one's done. All right, so let's work on the horizontals. All right, so now the horizontal ones get a little bit trickier because I need this horizontal piece. Remember that its origin is here. So when I look at H2, that's probably the easiest one to start with. We're going to add its position, and you can see that it goes back 0, up 0, but over on the red it goes 2 inches. So that actually equals the frame thickness. And then Y equals, let's see, should always be 0. And another way you can do that is just double click and hit, let's see, equals 0, enter. And this one equals 0, enter. So that's always going to be locked in at 0. Now the size of H2, we'll add our attribute, and we're going to go to size, and you can see that the length of it here on the red axis is equal to the overall width of the window minus 2 frame thicknesses. And if I look at my H2 formula, or even the H1 formula, it's the same. It's window width minus frame thickness minus frame thickness. So this is going to equal the window width minus the frame thickness minus the frame thickness, like that. This is going to equal this length Y, and this is going to equal our frame thickness. All right, so that H2 is good. And let me see, position and size, and then H1. Let's add our position attributes. Now H1 is this one up top. So H1, it's going to go over on the red by 2 inches and up by the overall height minus a frame thickness. So and this is a frame thickness, and then the other equation there. So H1 position is going to equal our frame thickness. So that's going to kick it over on the red axis by the 2 inches. And our Y is always going to equal 0. That's kind of easy. And then this one is going to equal the overall length Z minus a frame thickness minus a frame thickness. We'll hit enter. Oh, and you know what I did there is I was thinking of the actual length. So you can see that it actually dropped down. I put too many of those frame thicknesses on. So let's get rid of one of those. So we'll back that like that. Okay. This is where things do get goofy and it's ideal to save. So let me try and undo that. So I saved it. I hit Control Z. This guy, I think we're okay. Sometimes it is ideal to right click and save as to our Dropbox resources, components. Just kind of keep a running tab, like a running record of this. Go to our TSWFA, and here's our Condoc window tutorial. What did I call this? I thought I called this our test build. So let's call this our test build, window tutorial test build. Okay, so I think we're okay. Let's revisit this. Our Z position of this H1 is going to equal the overall height minus a frame thickness. There we go. So we want to see it just sit right there, not move around. Okay, so the H1 position is set, and now we need to add the H1 size. The length in the X direction is going to be the same as H2, and that's going to equal the length X minus a frame thickness minus a frame thickness. This is going to, the length Y is going to equal the overall length Y, and this length Z is going to equal, it's going to equal our frame thickness, like that. All right, so H1, H2 is all set. So let me just save this, and let's just test it. Let's just see. I'll make a copy of it, and then I'm going to stretch it. And now you can see that everything is kind of recalculating. So we're looking pretty good. That's working the way I want it to. But see what's happening? You can see that like this thing down low, this 2D graphic, is not working just yet. So if I turn off my 3D object, you can see that our 2D graphic is not intelligent. Our 2D graphic is not intelligent. Our 3D object is. All right, so I'm stoked that we actually kind of nailed that one on the first try, at least this beginning part. Let me try something else here too. I just want to make sure that this is working. If I go to my component, dynamic component options, and set this to like 4, okay, so you can see that everything built in and the glass shrunk. So it's all based on that frame thickness. So you can see that that's rebuilding and that's rebuilding. So I think we nailed it. We're looking good. All right, so what we want to do now is assign some attributes to the 2D graphic. So that's this guy down here. It's in that component. But now, let's see. We've got our. We could even turn off our 3D object for now. And let's see. So what we need is our 2D glass. If you remember, the 2D glass is this entire thing here. And so the 2D glass, the positions are always going to be zeros. I'm sorry, in the blue direction, it's always going to be 0, and we are going to scoot around a bit. So let's just go through it step by step. So 2D glass, we're going to go with, let's start with our 2D frame 1. That's kind of the easy one to add our position attribute. So really, that equals 0. This should equal 0. And this should equal 0. Because this frame on the left-hand side, its origin is right there, and we don't really want that to ever move. Now, the other frame, it is going to move. So let's go with our 2D frame 2, add an attribute of position, and you can see that it's at 22. So I want that to equal the overall red direction minus a frame thickness. We'll hit enter. And then our Y direction is always going to equal 0, and our Z direction is always going to equal 0. So that looks good. All right, now as for size though, we need to add some attributes to our 2D frame 1 and 2. Let's add our size attribute, and we'll add our size attribute. And length X, that is going to equal our frame thickness, and hit enter. So remember, you can always just click here and just type equals, and you can still scroll up and then click on length Y up here and hit enter. And length Z, that's really the thickness. That's the, that basically that's what length of Z is. It's 0. So we want that to equal 0. That's always just going to be flat. Okay. All right, so then we've got our F1 size, and then really I think this is going to be very much the same. This is going to equal our frame thickness, enter, and this length Y is going to equal our other length Y, and this length Z is always going to equal 0, enter. That is the idea. Yep, our thickness is always going to be 0. Okay, so now the last piece of this 2D puzzle is going to be our 2D glass. So I need to add an attribute of position. My 2D glass is always going to kick over 1 frame thickness on the red axis. So our position of 2D glass is going to equal 1 frame thickness, like that. And then everything else is going to equal 0 and equal 0, like that. Okay, so now the size of our glass, we're going to add an attribute of size, and the length X is going to equal the overall window length minus a frame thickness minus another frame thickness, and hit enter. This is going to equal, length Y is going to equal our length Y up there, and our length Z, or our thickness, is always going to equal 0, enter, like that. Oops, equals 0. 0, enter. Okay, let me save that and then do a save as, and we're going to call that our test build. Yes. Okay, so I think we're looking like we're in pretty good shape. I always like to make a copy before I start scaling that around. All right, so now check that out. Our frame is rebuilding itself. So when I stretch it way out and it gets big, it recalculates and keeps at a 2-inch frame. And if I go to my component options, I can set this to be like a 4-inch frame. And you can see that that also is rebuilding itself. So that is looking pretty good. Real good. Okay, perfect. Now, a couple of other attributes on this guy. Let me turn on my 3D object again. And, another attribute we want to add to the overall component is going to be our scale. So our scale tool. And what I want to do is edit our scale tool. So you see I can click here, and I want to scale along the X, Y, and Z, but I don't want to scale on these corners. Like, that's really, the way that should work. All right, so then I'll make a copy of it. And so now when I go to my scale tool, you can see that it restricts me like that. Cool? All right, so now what that means is when I have some walls built, I can just kind of stretch this thing around and just stretch it around, snap it to my openings. Very easy, very quick. Everything is kind of set up for me, and I'm amazed I did that in the first try. That was my first take. So anyway, I have built that one once before, but I was surprised that I was actually able to make that work, so I'm psyched. Anyway, that is a dynamic window component. So think about the other things you could do with this. I mean, if there's any way to expedite the drafting of cabinets or fixtures or equipment, maybe there's some other dynamic component options of like adding styles to your doors or styles to your windows, or maybe even drop down in the component options of like, maybe we could say like, I want this to be 1/8-inch scale resolution on my 2D graphic versus 1/4-inch resolution, because maybe on a 1/4-inch you want like some other molding or like detail on the frame, whereas at 1/8 inch you want it to be pretty simple. So, and even at 1/16, maybe it's just a simple line. So, there's some more building to be done here and some more experimentation, but I'm psyched that, we've gotten it this far. We've now got our door and our window, and I can tell you for sure from experience that this does extremely expedites in an extreme way the creation of like as-built drawings and really the whole condoc drafting system. So, yeah, give it a try. if you don't want to build your own dynamic components, at least appreciate the process, I suppose. So anyway, let me know how it works out for you. And if you guys come up with some cool ideas based on this, please let me know. I'd love to see your work. So we'll see you in the next tutorial.